A teenage girl in a small Oregon town just restored a vintage motorcycle for a homeless veteran using nothing but determination, borrowed tools, and a heart full of compassion. But what happened next? The motorcycle left untouched for decades helped uncover a buried legacy and gave that veteran something he hadn't felt in years, a reason to belong. This powerful story of how a mechanic girl restored a vintage bike for a homeless vet will stay with you long after it ends. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. In the quiet outskirts of Flagstone, Oregon, where pine trees whisper in the wind and old barns outnumber traffic lights, lived a 14-year-old girl named Charlotte Grayson. She wasn't like the other kids in town. While most teens scrolled through their phones or hung out at the mall, Charlotte spent her free time in her late father's old garage, elbow-deep in oil and steel, bringing broken engines back to life. She had learned everything she knew about machines from him, her dad, a former motorcycle racer turned small-town mechanic before he passed away 3 years ago. Since then, fixing engines had become Charlotte's therapy, her language, and her way of holding on to him. One cold October afternoon, while rummaging through parts behind a salvage yard, Charlotte noticed someone watching her. A tall, grizzled man with tired eyes and a military duffel slung over one shoulder stood near the fence, gazing not at her, but at the broken-down vintage bike leaning against the wall. He said nothing, just nodded once, and walked away. What Charlotte didn't know then was that this brief moment would change both their lives, and eventually, the hearts of an entire nation. The next day, Charlotte Grayson returned to the salvage yard with a purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. That same vintage motorcycle, the one the stranger had been staring at, was still leaning against the rusted fence, half buried in leaves and forgotten bolts. Something about his eyes lingered in her mind. Not just tired, but haunted. The kind of look you see in someone who's lost more than they've said out loud. She ran her fingers over the faded tank 1974 Triumph Bonneville. She whispered to herself. Her dad used to talk about these like they were legends, classic British steel, known for their heart more than their horsepower. This one, though, was more ghost than machine now. But Charlotte didn't see rust. She saw potential. That night, she asked her mom if they could bring it home. Just one more. She promised. Her mom raised an eyebrow. You gonna ride it? No, Charlotte replied, staring out the window toward the pine hills. I think someone else needs it more. Over the next few days, Charlotte returned to the salvage yard, each time hoping to catch a glimpse of the man. She didn't even know his name, but the way he looked at that bike, it meant something. Maybe it had meant something. Eventually. She found him again, this time behind the bakery, hunched over a cup of black coffee a kind worker must have handed him. She approached slowly, heart pounding. Sir, I saw you the other day, at Donnelly's yard. He looked up, startled but calm. You the girl with the tools, he asked, his voice low and raspy. Charlotte nodded. I brought that Triumph home. I think it meant something to you. The man blinked hard, almost disbelieving. He looked down, had one just like it, back in '85, before Iraq, before everything. She sat down beside him, resting a small notebook on her lap. If I restore it, would you take it for a ride again? The man chuckled softly. Ride it, kid. I haven't even stood straight in 3 years. Charlotte smiled gently. Then I'll fix that too. His name was Ray Lancaster, a former army mechanic who returned home to silence, to guilt, and to years of being forgotten. PTSD had taken his peace. A failed VA system had taken his housing. But somehow, this girl, this stubborn, gentle girl, was offering something no one else had a reason to stand back up. The restoration began. Every afternoon after school, Charlotte worked on the bike under a tarp in her backyard. She logged every bolt she replaced, every wire she spliced. Her grandpa even sent parts from Portland, calling in favors from old friends who remembered what honor looked like. The engine was the hardest it coughed, like a tired soldier refusing to wake. But Charlotte didn't give up. Ray stopped by one afternoon, limping along the gravel driveway. He said nothing, just stood there, watching her hands dance like a surgeon's over the frame. After a few minutes, he spoke. "That's the original carburetor design. How'd you know?" Charlotte wiped sweat from her brow. "I read manuals like most girls read magazines." Ray gave a deep, chesty laugh, maybe his first in years. That night, he brought her a photograph. Crumpled, sun-bleached. It was him young, grinning on a Triumph, just like the one she was restoring. There was another man on the back of the bike, his brother, who hadn't made it home. "She was his bike," Ray said. "I gave her away after the funeral. Couldn't bear to look." Charlotte studied the photo, then the bike, then Ray. "She's coming home," she said quietly. And for the first time in decades, Ray Lancaster nodded, not with the weight of memory, but with the flicker of hope. It was a crisp November morning when everything changed. Charlotte had been working on the Triumph for nearly a month. She was closer than she'd ever been to finishing something this meaningful. The engine finally roared to life just days ago, sputtering at first, then purring with the low, steady growl of a soul returning from the dead. She couldn't stop smiling. Neither could Ray. He had started showing up more often now, sometimes with an old thermos of coffee, other times with stories. His limp seemed lighter, his eyes clearer. He didn't say it, but Charlotte could tell the bike wasn't the only one healing. She had planned something special for that Saturday, a test ride, not just for the bike, but for Ray. She'd adjusted the clutch for smoother control, installed new grips, and even stitched a patch onto the seat, "Welcome home." But when she got to the garage that morning, the motorcycle was gone. Vanished. The tarp had been tossed to the side. Her tools were scattered. A deep set of tire tracks led out to the road and disappeared into the misty Oregon hills. Charlotte froze. Her throat tightened. At first, she thought Ray had taken it maybe as a surprise. But then doubt crept in. The way the garage was left, it didn't feel like him. Her mom came running out when she heard the door slam. "Lottie, what's wrong?" "It's gone," Charlotte whispered. "Someone took it." By that afternoon, word had spread through Flagstone like wildfire. The bike wasn't just any old machine, it had become a symbol. People at the bakery, the post office, the marina, they'd all watched Charlotte bring it back to life, and many had quietly followed Ray's transformation, too. Sheriff Donnelly, a longtime friend of Charlotte's late father, came by personally. "You're saying someone stole it?" Charlotte nodded, eyes red. "I was going to give it to Ray today." The sheriff sighed, then looked out toward the pines. "This town's small. That bike won't stay hidden long." And he was right. Just after sunset, a teenager named Cody, who worked at the gas station, called in. He'd seen someone riding a black and white Triumph down the back roads near Millstone Creek. Said the rider looked young. Too young. Reckless. By nightfall, the town had rallied. It wasn't a manhunt, it was a homecoming mission. Ray showed up just before the search party left. He stood silently at the edge of the group, fists clenched, jaw tight. "Don't do this for me," he said softly. But Charlotte stepped forward and looked up at him. "No," she said, "I'm doing this with you." They found the bike at dawn. It had been ditched behind the old sawmill, muddy and scratched, but not broken. The thief, just a runaway kid from the next town over, had already been picked up. He was 17, homeless, hungry, and thought it was just another scrap machine. When Ray saw the motorcycle, he didn't yell. He didn't rage. He just walked up to it, sank to one knee, and placed a weathered hand on the gas tank. "It's okay," he whispered. "You made it back." Charlotte stood behind him, holding her breath. "I don't care about the paint," she said. "We'll fix it." Again. Ray looked over his shoulder. His voice cracked. "I care about what it gave me, and what you gave me." Back in the garage that evening, Charlotte cleaned every scratch like it was a badge of honor. Ray helped. They worked in silence at first, then in stories. That night, Charlotte pulled out a small box she'd kept hidden under the workbench. Inside was a brand new set of keys with a brass tag that read, "For Ray, when you're ready." "I was going to give this to you before the ride," she said. Ray took the keys in his trembling hand. "I wasn't ready," he whispered. "But I think I am now." After the bike was found and brought home, something inside Ray Lancaster began to shift quietly. Then, all at once, for years, he'd lived like a shadow, a ghost in his own country. He wandered back roads, slept under overpasses, avoided eye contact, and built up a wall so high that even kindness couldn't scale it. People had tried, he knew that. But when your nightmares wear a uniform, and your regrets speak louder than your words, it's easier to disappear than to be seen. But now he had a reason to stay. It wasn't the motorcycle, not really. It was Charlotte, the girl who hadn't known him from Adam, who didn't ask for his story before offering him hope. The girl who looked at him and didn't see a drifter or a damaged man. She saw a mechanic, a soldier, a person worth building something for. And it made Ray start to see himself differently, too. "Hey!" The next week, Ray showed up at the Grayson home every morning, even before Charlotte got back from school. He'd sweep the garage, organize her tools, wipe down the workbench. He didn't ask. He just showed up, like the garage was a second chance he wasn't about to waste. "Thought you hated getting up early." Charlotte teased one afternoon, dropping her backpack on the bench. Ray shrugged. Turns out purpose is a better alarm clock than guilt. They laughed. But behind that laugh was a shift, subtle, but real. Charlotte began asking Ray more questions, not just about engines, but about him. What it was like to fix helicopters in the Army. What it was like to come home to silence. What it was like to lose a brother and never have a place to grieve. Ray didn't answer all of them. Not right away. But every now and then, a story would slip through. One day, as Charlotte sanded a dent on the fuel tank, she asked gently, "Why'd you stop fixing things?" Ray paused. "Because everything I touched after the war broke." Charlotte didn't flinch. She just kept sanding. "Well," she said, "this one didn't." That night, Ray walked farther than usual, past the pine trees, past the old mill road, up to the cemetery at the edge of town. He hadn't been there in 20 years. He knelt by a grave worn smooth with time and pulled something from his coat pocket, a photo of him and his brother, 2 boys on a Triumph, grinning like fools. He placed it on the headstone and whispered, "She's riding again. And so am I." Back in town, word of Ray and Charlotte's story had spread beyond Flagstone. A local blogger shared photos of the restoration. Then a regional news outlet picked it up. Within days, national media outlets were reaching out, asking for interviews, segments, documentaries. But Charlotte wasn't interested in the cameras. She was interested in the ride. She had one more surprise planned. One Saturday morning, she wheeled the restored Triumph onto Main Street. The town had gathered. Hundreds of people lined the sidewalk. many of them veterans, some holding flags, some wiping their eyes. Charlotte handed Ray a helmet. He hesitated, then placed it on slowly, his hands trembling not from fear, but from something far older doubt that was finally breaking. He mounted the bike. Charlotte hopped onto the back, and together they rode. Not far, just a lap around town. But to Ray, it felt like 1,000 miles in the right direction. People clapped. Some cheered. Others stood in silence, hands over hearts. When they returned to the square, Ray took off his helmet, dismounted, and turned to Charlotte. "Didn't think I'd ever be part of something like this again." Charlotte smiled. "We're not done yet." That evening, they sat on the garage steps, watching the last of the sunlight fade behind the trees. "I used to think broken things stayed broken," Ray said quietly. Charlotte looked down at her hands, greasy, scraped, but proud. "I used to think kids like me couldn't change anything." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ray spoke. "But you did. You changed everything." The Monday after the ride through town. Charlotte opened her front door to find 3 things on her porch: a steaming thermos of coffee, a newspaper with her and Ray's photo on the front page, and a handwritten letter sealed in a navy blue envelope. She opened the letter first. "Dear Charlotte, I saw what you and Mr. Lancaster did. So did the country. And I believe your garage isn't just a garage anymore. It's a classroom. It's a sanctuary. It's a beginning. Please call me when you can. I'd like to help you build something bigger. Call Nathan Briggs Rhett, Veterans Workshop Initiative." She read it twice before running out to the garage, waving the letter like a flag. "Ray," she shouted, "you need to see this." Ray Lancaster, halfway through realigning the front brakes on a neighbor's dirt bike, wiped his hands and raised an eyebrow. He read the letter silently, then looked up at Charlotte. Unsure. "You think it's real?" he asked. Charlotte nodded. "It feels real." It was real. Colonel Nathan Briggs had founded the Veterans Workshop Initiative after his own return home left him feeling aimless. The program gave veterans hands-on mentorship roles in community repair shops across the country. They taught skills, offered purpose, and helped rebuild more than just engines. He wasn't just offering a pat on the back, he was offering them a partnership. Within 2 weeks, the Grayson Garage was transformed. With donations pouring in from across the country, tools, equipment, even a new lift system, what started as a quiet backyard project turned into something far greater. The Flagstone Garage Collective. And at the heart of it, a teenage girl in oil-stained overalls, and a war-worn man who once thought his best days were long behind him. Ray Lancaster became the shop's lead mentor. The same man who once couldn't meet a stranger's eyes was now guiding young mechanics from Flagstone High on how to rebuild carburetors and rewire ignition systems. He even held a weekly coffee and carburetor session for local veterans who needed more than just engine advice. Charlotte, meanwhile, took on the role of lead instructor for teens her age and younger, kids who had never touched a wrench, kids who'd felt invisible, kids just like she used to be. One afternoon, a boy named Tyler stood quietly by the door, watching Charlotte torque a head bolt into place. "Can I try?" he asked. She looked up, smiling. "Only if you promise to mess it up at least once." He laughed nervously. She handed him the wrench. That moment it was the beginning of his own second chance. Oh, but the biggest surprise came when a large box arrived from Washington to see, no return label, just a typed note inside. We don't often admit when the system falls short, but sometimes it takes a girl with a wrench to remind us how to fix what we've broken. Consider this a start. Inside the box was a set of bronze stars, issued posthumously in the name of Ray's brother, along with a certificate correcting the decades-old omission from military records. A small gesture, but it broke something loose in Ray. For the first time since the war, he cried in front of someone. "Why now?" he asked. Charlotte didn't answer right away. She just looked at the motorcycle parked beside them, the Triumph they rebuilt, the one that had started it all. "Because the world can only ignore a whisper," she said, "until it becomes an engine." Why? From then on, the garage became more than a workshop. It became a movement. People drove from other states to meet Charlotte and Ray. News crews came and went. A documentary crew from PBS filmed a special called The Wrench and the Warrior. Schools began requesting toolkits to start their own programs. And through it all, Charlotte remained grounded because the mission hadn't changed. It was never about fame. It was always about fixing what matters. And sometimes, what needs fixing isn't metal. Sometimes, it's a man who hasn't spoken to his brother's grave in 30 years. Sometimes, it's a teenager who thought her hands weren't good for anything but silence. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's an entire town that forgot what community really means. There's a quiet kind of transformation that doesn't come with applause. It doesn't arrive with headlines or viral posts. It happens slowly through oil-stained knuckles, repeated mistakes, and the act of showing up when no one else would. That's how Charlotte Grayson grew into the person she was becoming. She wasn't just the girl who fixed a bike anymore. She had become a leader, a mentor, and perhaps most unexpectedly a symbol. But it wasn't easy. With attention came pressure. She had never wanted to be the face of anything. She just wanted to fix broken things. But now people were asking her to speak at conferences, sit on youth innovation panels, even design technical curriculums. At night, she sometimes sat in the garage alone, staring at the Triumph that started it all, feeling overwhelmed by how far things had come and how quickly. "I don't want to be some kind of savior," she confessed one evening to Ray. He looked up from the engine he was rebuilding and grunted. "Good. Because nobody asked you to be. Just keep being a mechanic. Let the rest sort itself out." Simple words, but exactly what she needed. Because Charlotte didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to keep showing up. And she did. Meanwhile, Ray Lancaster's transformation was something the town quietly marveled at. He began walking straighter, speaking more, laughing, even. He started shaving regularly, and one day he showed up wearing a clean button-down shirt, a small thing. But Charlotte noticed. He had also begun journaling. Each day, after the last student left the garage, Ray would sit at the corner bench and write, not about war or trauma, but about engines, lessons learned, people met. He called it the Rebuild Book. When Charlotte asked if she could read it one day, he said, "Only when you write the last page." She smiled. Deal? The Flagstone Garage Collective grew into more than just a program. It became a second family for kids who never fit in anywhere else. There was Zoe, who had failed math twice, but could rebuild a transmission blindfolded. Marcus, who had been suspended for fighting, but found peace in carburetors. Even Grady, a wheelchair-bound sophomore with muscular dystrophy, who rewired the electrical systems for 5 bikes using only custom tools and limitless grit. And Ray, he was their anchor. He never raised his voice, never bragged, but when he told you that you'd done a good job, you felt it for days. One Friday, the mayor of Flagstone surprised the garage with an official proclamation, Ray Lancaster Day. Ray stood in front of the students, blinking in disbelief. "This ain't me," he said. "This is all her," pointing to Charlotte. But Charlotte shook her head. "No, this is us." Over time, Charlotte's confidence grew into clarity. She didn't want to leave Flagstone for some high-powered engineering program, at least not yet. She had work to do right here. Work that mattered. She started teaching free classes for veterans and teens on weekends. She developed an apprenticeship model for local businesses to hire her students, and she began documenting each restoration project in detail photos, audio logs, student notes, so others could replicate it elsewhere. One afternoon, after a long day of sanding down an old Harley tank, Charlotte sat beside Ray on the garage steps. Same spot they always went when the sun dipped low. "You think this is it?" she asked. "What we're supposed to do?" Ray took a sip of coffee from his dented thermos and thought for a long time. "I think fixing a machine is easy," he said. "Fixing a life, that's where the real mechanics are made." Charlotte didn't reply. She just leaned back, let the late light wash over her face, and listened to the steady tick of cooling engines and the hum of cicadas in the trees. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. Not perfect, not polished, but whole. On the 1-year anniversary of the Triumph's first ride, the town of Flagstone gathered once more. But this time, it wasn't just for Charlotte or for Ray. It was for every person who had ever walked into that little garage with grease on their hands and uncertainty in their hearts, and walked out knowing they mattered. Main Street was blocked off. Folding chairs lined the sidewalks. Local bands played classic rock. A banner stretched across the town square read, "Restoration more than just machines." At center stage sat the restored Triumph, polished to a mirror shine, every detail meticulously preserved, not as a trophy, but as a testament, a living memory of what it meant to take something broken and give it back its voice. Ray stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes misty. He hadn't prepared a speech, never liked being the center of anything. But when the mayor called him forward and handed him a microphone, the crowd fell into a hush. He paused, looked out at the sea of faces. Kids, veterans, parents, teachers. Some he recognized, some he didn't. All of them here because of one impossible thing. Hope had taken root in a garage. He cleared his throat. "I was a ghost when I met Charlotte Grayson. I'd stopped talking to people, stopped caring about much of anything. But she didn't treat me like I was broken. She handed me a wrench and asked for help. The audience hung on every word. She didn't fix me," he added. "We fixed something together. That's the difference." The silence that followed was heavier than applause. But when the clapping did come, it came like thunder. Charlotte hadn't planned to speak either. But after Ray sat down, she walked quietly to the stage, her face pink with nervousness. She adjusted the mic and smiled that same crooked smile she always made when a bolt wouldn't come loose. "I don't think I ever expected any of this," she began. "I just wanted to rebuild a bike." She glanced toward Ray. "But I ended up rebuilding myself and helping someone else do the same. I think that's what we're all capable of if we slow down long enough to listen." She paused, then pulled a small cloth from her back pocket and unwrapped a metal plate. It was the original ID tag from the Triumph, weathered, corroded, but still legible. She held it high. "This is what started it all," she said, "and it's staying right here in Flagstone." Cheers erupted. That evening, when the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned out, Charlotte and Ray wheeled the Triumph back into the garage for the night. It was quiet again, just the two of them, the creak of the garage door and the hum of a radio playing soft in the background. Charlotte stood at the workbench, running her fingers over old project notes and schematics. "You know," she said, "I used to think mechanics was just fixing parts. Now I think it's listening, paying attention, understanding what no one else sees." Ray chuckled. "Sounds a lot like life." She turned to him, serious. "What do we do now?" He shrugged. "Same thing we've always done. Open the door, let the next one in." And they did. Over the months that followed, the Flagstone Garage Collective became a model replicated in small towns across the country. Veterans and youth worked side by side, learning not just how to fix bikes or cars, but how to fix trust, to build belief, to rediscover worth. Charlotte continued mentoring. She turned down college offers to stay with the program a little longer. There's still more to build, she told interviewers. And Ray, he finally wrote the last page of the rebuild book. He titled it Not the End, Just the Ride. Because what started as a girl, a broken bike, and a forgotten man in a forgotten town became something no one could have predicted. It became a movement, a family, a reason. It became proof that you don't need a degree, a title, or 1,000 followers to change the world. Sometimes, all you need is a wrench, a heart, and the courage to care. Anyone can rebuild what's broken if they're brave enough to try and kind enough to care. As the sun set behind the flagstone pines, Charlotte Grayson locked up the garage for the night. Not because her work was done, but because it was just beginning. In her hand wasn't a wrench, but a list of names: teens, vets, drifters, dreamers, people who had been forgotten, underestimated, or written off entirely. Charlotte once thought she was just fixing a motorcycle. But now she understood she had helped restore something far more powerful: dignity, purpose, and belief. For Ray Lancaster, for herself, for everyone who thought second chances didn't come with spark plugs and grease. The girl who once doubted her place in the world had become the builder of bridges between generations, one bolt, one engine, one life at a time. Because for Charlotte, and for those she lifts up, restoration was never about the machine. It was always about the human underneath. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to ride along with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe hope is worth rebuilding.